How's it going, guys? Making a loaf of sourdough bread today. Thought I would invite you guys to tag along. What I'm making is a 70% hydration loaf, which is really good for beginners. It's going to be more stable, less sticky, and a little bit easier to handle while working through. I've got my whole wheat sourdough starter that I'm going to be using, and this recipe is going to be comprised of entirely white flour. I recommend unbleached. If you use bleached, it's going to work out fine. But here's my recipe that I have right here. It is a 70% hydration loaf. We're going to be using 350 grams of white flour and then 245 grams of water. That's currently mixed right now in the auto lease process. We're going to let it sit for about 30 minutes before combining the salt and starter into it. So as you can see, it's just been blended together. That is just water and flour. Pretty sticky, but this is going to help the gluten structure. I was just telling Nanako that I should be dressed more formally, but it's quarantine, so I think all rules go out the window now. But so our 30 minutes is up. The auto lease has allowed this to really help break down the yeast that's in here. We're going to be adding 150 grams of our starter, along with, I'm doing 7 grams of salt, which is 2% of the total flour content. So let's go ahead, drop in. This is a good and active starter. Just watching here. 70, 80, 120, 30, 40, a little bit more. And boom. 155, that'll do. And then with salt content, I'm just gonna re-tare it. And we're gonna drop this to 7 grams or 2%. 7, perfect. All right, and now make sure that all your jewelry's taken off. I left my ring somewhere on the counter. And then here we're just going to fold this in. Going to be lifting and folding just to get it all kind of blended in. You're not going to be mixing it like you would in an auto lease process. You don't want to cut the dough. You just want to kind of fold it over onto itself until you can see the starter and dough is really just kind of blended in together. And then we're going to let that rest for 30 minutes. All right, guys. So it's been 30 minutes now since this was blended and let rest. Now what we've got, and it was covered, now what we've got is kind of a slacked, relaxed dough. What we're gonna do now is what's called a stretch and fold process. What we're doing is we're activating the gluten by just rotating it. We're gonna be pulling one corner, just folding it on top of it. Pulling a corner, folding it on top. Okay, we're just gonna go around and do that. And what this is gonna do is help it elasticize. That way when it begins to grow from the yeast, it'll grow more freely and less restricted. We're gonna do this process 3 times just until it's good and activated. So we'll finish this. Set another timer for 30 minutes, do it again. Set another timer for 30 minutes, do it one more time, and then we'll pick back up. All right, appreciate it. All right, so I just did my last turn, and you can see the stretchiness of the dough has changed quite a bit. And also, when you pull it, it kind of pulls away from the side of the container. That's when you know it is done and ready to rest. So I'm gonna let this rest for, I'm gonna do 3.5 hours because it's a smaller loaf. And then, yeah, this is gonna really deepen the flavors of the sourdough. Okay, so after the 4-hour rest, I went ahead and pulled it out of the bowl onto a floured counter and just covered with a light piece of saran wrap to keep the air off it. We're gonna let it rest for about 20 minutes before we form our loaf. All right, so it's been resting here on the counter. We can go ahead and pull the saran wrap off. Hopefully it didn't stick to it at all. And we're done with that. Now we're gonna lightly flour the counter. And we're gonna be stretching our loaf out, stretching our dough out to now form our loaf. It's very elastic, almost like pizza dough right now. What we're gonna do is kind of stretch it out over an area, and this is where we're gonna fold it in, form the loaf. We wanna try and incorporate air into it, so we're just gonna fold it lightly like this. Make sure that you don't over flour, you're gonna get these weird, awkward flour pockets within your loaf. But in doing this, what we're doing, and you wanna be gentle with it because you've worked really hard to get all this air in here through those rising processes, so you wanna try not to break those bubbles. But this is going to give you that marbling effect that you see within a loaf. All right. And what we really want to do is create a little bit of surface tension. So I'm just kind of tucking the edges into the center of it underneath. All right. And then you can also just flour the counter a little bit and use a scraper tool to just kind of tuck it in like that. All right, and then this is going to be ready to go into our banneton, which I've already floured right here. You can also use a colander, something like this that you'd strain pasta in, and just throw a ton of flour on top of a rag that goes in it, and then cover it with another rag. But we're gonna throw ours in here. Top of the loaf is gonna be facing down. And then we're just gonna throw a rag over the top of it. We wanna make sure that it's nice and floured around the edges, that way it doesn't stick to the banneton as it grows, and doesn't stick to the rag that's on top of it while it's sitting there. And then if you have the ability to use a cloth that's got a very tight weave to it, that way it doesn't rise into it, then you can set that aside for about 2.5 hours, and then we're gonna check it back real quick. Okay, so we're gonna check the loaf. This has been rising for 2 hours right now. It's rising up a little bit, but what we're checking for is to see how much it's risen. So we're gonna do the poke test. I'm poking it, and see how it rises all the way back to like almost where it was. That means that it's still in the rising process. We wanna poke it and then have it barely rise up a little bit. This is still rising too much more, so it's probably got another 30 minutes left on it. All right, so the rise is officially done. We can go ahead and pull our cover off the loaf. It has good and risen. And then, yep. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn it over on some parchment paper real quick. And then it's gonna go into the oven, which has been preheating with there's a Dutch oven in there at about 550 degrees. And it's been preheating for about 45 minutes. Boing. Perfect. All right. I'm just gonna dust off a little bit of this excess flour that's on here before it goes into the oven, and we are going to score it with a razor blade. One cut right across the top. Boom. Perfect. All right, and then we're gonna throw it in the oven real quick for 20 minutes inside of the Dutch oven. right, it is in the Dutch oven. Throw the lid on it, throw it back in, 20 minutes. And when doing this, you really got to make sure that your Dutch oven has been preheating for at least a half an hour, preferably 45 minutes, so that it's just piping hot, because that's what's really going to give the sourdough this crust that you're looking for. All right, our 20 minutes are up. Hold this out. We're going to lower the oven to about 375. And we're going to pull the lid off this. You guys want to see how it looks so far? Boom. That's a loaf right there. Look at that good shoe that's on the top of it. Or a foot. I don't know what it's called. And then now that we've lowered the oven to 375, we're going to throw it back in for just another 15 minutes or so. To really let it crisp up. All right, now we're going to pull it out, see how it looks. Turn the oven off. That is a gorgeous looking loaf. So here is our finished loaf. Big shoe that rose up right there. That's the split where we cut right down the middle. See how the bottom looks? Yeah, bottom's a little overcooked. But it can still be a good loaf. You can tell by the sound it's done. Alright, thanks for watching. Hey guys, this is the loaf that came out of the oven last night. Gorgeous loaf. We're going to cut into it now and kind of see how the structure turned out. Oh yeah, that's a good loaf. Thanks for watching, and message me if you have any questions.